Okay, awesome. I'm going to go ahead and get started. Good morning and welcome to Maynard Casterison's Nonprofit Education Series. Today is our session is QuickBooks Best Practices for Nonprofits. We're very happy to see you here. A few housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. Everyone will be muted, but if you have any questions, please type them in the chat and we will have time at the end to answer your questions. Due to some unforeseen circumstances, our original speaker will not be here today. However, I would like to welcome Sarah Jennings and Courtney Kelterborn to today's session. Both speakers have different levels of experience with QuickBooks in regards to nonprofits and will bring a depth of knowledge to you today. During your session today, if you find that you're not getting what you need out of your QuickBooks product, please reach out to us. We may have a solution within QuickBooks to help you get what you need, or our technology team does have many other solutions that may fit well with your organization and what you're looking to accomplish. With that being said, Sarah, I will turn it over to you to start.
Thank you so much, Brandy. And yes, Courtney and I will be excited to tag team today's presentation. Our roles are a little bit different. I get into QuickBooks and I know what I want to look for and I know how I want it to function, but I'm not usually the one that sets up that functionality. So Courtney's on the other end of the spectrum and she can kind of do both. She knows what it's supposed to do, what it can do, but she also can help us get everything set up. I focus on nonprofits. Courtney focuses in the for-profit arena. So we wanted to make sure that we had both perspectives here as Madison wasn't able to join us today. So thank you for joining and we are excited to get started. I will go ahead and share my screen here. And maybe, there we go. We were just talking about how that needs to be a little bit smoother. So QuickBooks best practices. What we're going to look at today is we have a lot of clients that are looking at, should we be on desktop or should we be online? What on QuickBooks Online, what's right for us and what are the pros and cons for each? So we'll go over some of those things and then we'll get into the best practices through configuration and maintenance, how we need to make sure everything's set up the right way in order to process it effectively, processing best practices within the transactions, within record keeping, how we see nonprofits in particular doing great jobs reporting. What are you reporting? How are you doing that in a streamlined fashion? And then we certainly want to make sure that we're talking about some third-party applications and how those can integrate in. And that, as Brandy said earlier, we'll definitely have time for questions at the end if you have any. Courtney is going to monitor that chat throughout. So if you have any questions, put them in there. She'll do a great job. If there's anything that we need to say out loud, we can do that, but also she can respond as we go. So first, again, we're looking at the pros and cons of QuickBooks, desktop versus online. We'll start with desktop. I know I get a lot of questions from clients and they're asking for why should we go? It's so from desktop to QuickBooks to online, pardon me. There's a lot of concern that there's a lot of change. It doesn't have the same functionality. So really, it's important to look at what are the pros. Desktop, it doesn't require internet connection. So if you work frequently with unstable internet, desktop might be the way to go. You're not going to have that fluctuation in how it's connecting to things. There's less frequent billing. You can pay a whole year in advance and just pay for your subscription as opposed to the monthly subscription that QuickBooks Online usually is set up to do. And quite honestly, if you decide not to update your QuickBooks version, which we don't recommend, but if you decide not to do that, you don't have to do that because you have the static desktop version. We absolutely recommend that you do that at least every 3 years, every single year. If you're using any of the payroll applications, you need to do that. But for just the standard QuickBooks desktop, I would not go beyond 3 years in your version. And then desktop does have some more complex reporting abilities. I think that's probably the single most thing that people are looking for in QuickBooks Online that they miss from QuickBooks Desktop is just some of the reporting capabilities. Part of it is just you have to change the way you're looking at things. It's going to look a little bit different, but for the most part, we can get all of that information out. Some of the cons, you have to do manual updates. So if you have QuickBooks Desktop, again, it's not automatically syncing all the time back to Intuit. So those are manual backups because it's not connected to the cloud. So you have to make sure that you're doing those backups on a regular basis, same as you would for any of your server files. Bank connectivity is sometimes a little bit more difficult in QuickBooks Desktop than online. And then loss of support. This really really is the reason that we say don't go more than 3 years. If you start to do that, you're not going to have support over your product and your licenses. When we're looking at QuickBooks Online, some of the pros, it's cloud-based like we talked about earlier. So you can access it from Australia, you can access it from the beach, you can access it from your cabin up north if you want to. You're not tied to, you can access it from your phone. You're not tied quite so much to your desktop or your laptop computer that it was loaded onto. Automatic updates, like any software, and more and more software applications are moving towards the cloud, because when they find things that need to be updated within the application, they're able to do that automatically, and they don't have to send it out and then you shut down your office so that you can do the updates. It's automatic and streamlined. Transaction downloading is really streamlined. There's a lot more things that collaborate with QuickBooks Online than they do the desktop version, again, because of the open API in the cloud. Access and collaboration, again, a lot of that is because you can be anywhere, anytime. I don't know if that's a pro or a con, that you can be on vacation on the beach and still access your QuickBooks file, but we probably should have put that in the con column also. And then monthly subscriptions. So you don't have that one big hit of your annual subscription fee. It's a monthly smaller subscription that you can put in there. The cons, it requires internet access. So if you are very remote and you don't have a consistent internet connection, it struggles. Clearly, it's not going to be ideal. It'll slow down the system just like any of your other online applications. It's not as industry specific, so there aren't as many options with the QuickBooks Online as there are in desktop, getting it for construction or things like that. There are some things that we'll look at in the configuration to make sure that you're getting the nonprofit industry specific verbiage, at least in some of the fields. It lacks some job costing abilities. I don't know as that applies to most of our nonprofits. And then again, it does have some limitations on the reporting. A lot of that, though, there are applications that you can utilize that we'll talk about in a moment to make the reporting a little bit more robust so that you can get what you want out of the system. So when you're considering this transition, again, you definitely need to, as a team, not just the accounting team, but the leadership team, the department heads or program directors, make sure that you're looking at all of those pros and cons so that everything is considered. Once you decide we're going to go to QuickBooks Online, you prepare the desktop file for conversion. It's really a simple process. You export the files to QuickBooks Online, and then you access it. It's 3 steps, very short process, probably under an hour in most cases. There are some things that we recommend that you do prior to that conversion, just to make sure that it does go smoothly. We definitely recommend that you go through all of your customers, your vendors, your chart of accounts, make them inactive, just clean things up a little bit before you do that. The data will all come over to QuickBooks Online, so that's not a concern at all. It's just how quickly it does it. So we want to make sure that it's as clean as possible when you do that conversion, so you're starting with a clean slate. So what comes in there? Active data comes in, inactive items. Again, when you're looking through your vendor and your customer list, you're not getting rid of them, you're just inactivating them so that it comes over a bit more streamlined. Employees will come over, the chart of accounts will come over, sales tax, payroll status, all of your memorized transactions will come over automatically when you do that conversion. QuickBooks isn't stupid. Clearly, they're going to make it easy for you to go to one of their products to another one of their products. So we haven't seen too many, and I think Courtney would agree, too many issues. Certainly on that previous slide, we said one of the big things to do at the end is just compare the data, make sure that there isn't any data loss in that conversion, but I haven't seen where that has been an issue. All right, so we went through the pros and the cons. Most of what we'll talk about today is focused in QuickBooks Online. With all of our client base, I think that's predominantly where we're seeing people move to if they're not there already. throughout the pandemic, it really showed people the importance of having access all the time, anywhere. The flexibility that team members are requesting and requiring really is moving people to cloud versions of all accounting softwares. But most of the things that we'll talk about apply to QuickBooks Desktop as well. So if you have any questions specifically about a desktop version, please don't hesitate to put that in the chat and we will address it. So first, when you go in here, there's a couple different things that we want to make sure. Again, earlier we said through the pros and the cons, there are some things that you can't do with QuickBooks Online that you can customize or modify with QuickBooks Desktop or have different industry specific things, but not all. There are some things that we see a lot of organizations, they don't pay attention to, a lot of nonprofits. So it still comes up that it's your balance sheet, for example. That's a kind of a silly one. We all know the balance sheet is a statement of financial position and vice versa. But when you're reporting to your board and when you're reporting to your leadership team or your funders, you want to make sure that you're using the right verbiage. It just streamlines things. So if you go to that little gear icon in your QuickBooks Online version and go to this account settings, when you come in here, there's a couple different areas. So if you come up to this company, you'll be able to see what type of company you are in. This is important to fill out because all of this company type in the tax form, it starts to feed some of the verbiage throughout the rest of the application. So you want to make sure that you're putting that information in here. The other thing that's important to look at is the addresses that you have in here. So you have addresses that can be your company address often or your organization address. Oftentimes that's the same across the board, but sometimes you may have a different address that's donor facing. You maybe have a management company or somebody that's taking your deposits or somebody that a board member that is the company address, kind of the holder, but that's not what you want your donors to see. So that's just something to consider when you're going through things. The other thing that is important to take a look at is all of the access that you have within the usage limits. So that is going to be down on the third bullet point on the left-hand side of your screen is the usage limit, pardon me. So it goes through your billable users, your chart of accounts, your classes and locations. There's all sorts of accessibility and things that you have access to. Oftentimes when we see people have frustrations or they think that there's limitations, it's just because they don't know. So definitely explore that little gear icon before you get too frustrated with the reporting and the capabilities of things. Absolutely.
On the usage limits, I know some
go.
people get kind of nervous when they see that their package might have a limit of 250 accounts in the chart of accounts. I did just want to note, if you come from desktop to online, any accounts you have set up in desktop before the transfer don't count towards that 250 account limit. So if you currently have 300 accounts, when you go to online, it'll say you have 0 accounts towards that limit. So I just wanted to throw that out there in case that's a concern.
That is a really great point. So just new accounts created
Yep.
once you're already in the online version.
Yep.
That is a really great point. Thank you. The next thing to look at is again, these are configuration settings that we consider best practices so that you're communicating the right thing. So when you're looking at this you always go to this customize tab, customize the look and feel of how your invoices, how your donor requests, your statements and things look to your donor facing, your member facing folks. Make sure that you're going through and customizing these things. The other thing that we want to make sure that you look at within the account settings is the advanced options. Again, make sure that you've got the appropriate fiscal year, you've got your accounting method, whether you're cash or accrual, whether or not you're closing the books. We definitely recommend, it's a good practice to close the books at least at year end so that you don't have a lot of changes in previous years. This is where you'll go through the tax form, all of those things. The other thing that's important on this advanced tab that we see people miss occasionally is this automation area. So there's some defaults that are going to come over for you, but make sure you take a look at this because you do generally want into it to insert previously entered content. Again, this is where we start talking about artificial intelligence and trying to streamline, automate things. We want to make sure that the system's working for us, not against us. Automatically apply credits. Any of these things can be overridden if you decide for this vendor, this customer or member or donor that you don't want it to apply a credit or something. You can always reverse that, or you can always override that, but we want it to automatically prompt you, automatically apply bill payments, things like that. Again, just some settings that you want to make sure that you're taking a look at. The other preferences, just to make sure, again, you're looking at that are best practices. We like to see that you're being warned if a duplicate check number is issued. We don't recommend redoing check numbers. It's not something any of your auditors are going to like. Warn me, the user, if you enter a bill number that's already been used for a vendor. This is a good thing to actually turn on. That way it helps you know if you're getting a duplicate vendor invoice from a vendor. So if Joe's catering sent you an invoice and you didn't pay it, but they sent it again because there was just some timing difference of when they actually received that payment, you want the system to tell you, hey, I think we have that bill in here already. Warn if a duplicate journal number is used. Again, all of these things we recommend, these are on, not off. All of them we want to be on. The next thing we want to make sure that you take a look at is your chart of accounts. Again, when you're converting over to QuickBooks Online, we want to make sure that you're cleaning things up as much as possible. In this chart of accounts area, which you can get to a couple different ways, you can either get to it from this accounting on the left-hand side. There's this accounting button that you can go to see the chart of accounts, or you can actually get to it through lists and that gear icon again. But this is where you want to make sure that you're taking a look at your accounts, that you're going through and you're making sure that you know that they are in the right bucket, that they are active. So you're using all of the things that you want. Once you're in this chart of accounts, you can just go over to the right-hand side and make it inactive if you hadn't done that in the past, or you can edit that account number. If you're editing it, things that you're looking for are making sure, again, it's in the right bucket. This information on this screen is what drives your financial reporting. So it's really critical to make sure in that configuration and how you're setting things up that it's in the right buckets. That's how you make your reports come out, how you want to see them, and how your leadership wants to see them, and how your board ultimately wants to see them. Again, if you, the name records must, when you're merging records, I'm sorry about that. I had that over my title screen. So the other thing that we want to make sure, we talked about cleaning up vendor records and customer records prior to converting. If you've already converted, or if you've been in QuickBooks Online for quite some time, it's really important to maintain a clean database. This helps for all of the usage requirements, but it also helps just for clean accounting. I mean, best practices are you don't have multiple different vendors or customers with the same name, unless there's a logical, like a necessary reason for that. I'll tell you from a internal control, a fraud examination practice, if there's multiple duplicate vendors, for example, that's always a red flag. We always look at those areas because there are some reasons that makes sense, but there's not tons of reasons that makes sense. So things that you do when you're trying to clean them up, you look at those duplicate vendors or customers. It works the same either way, and you can merge the records together so you don't lose all of that history. The names must match exactly. So if you need to modify one of those names prior to this merging, you can do that. Again, it retains all of the transactions, so you don't lose any of that history. You can also go through and inactivate customers and vendors. We definitely recommend you do that probably every year at least to make sure that you're maintaining a clean database. It just makes things run smoother. It reduces errors. If you have vendors in there that you haven't used in 5 years, there's always a risk that somebody's accidentally going to pick that vendor, or some customer is inadvertently going to get selected. If it's inactive, you always have the option to activate that again, that vendor again, and you'll get prompted for that. If you start to enter in a new vendor that you had in the past, QuickBooks will prompt you to say, hey, this was in here. Do you want to reactivate that vendor or customer? So again, you can also delete things, but that'll delete the transaction history. That's not something we want to do. So just make sure that we're using the inactive and keeping our database clean. So now that we have looked at the best practices for configuration and for maintaining a clean database and a clean accounting system, we'll look at some of the processing best practices. So first we'll look at receiving payment. So when we are getting payments from our donors or our members, we always recommend that you're receiving payment if sales receipts aren't used. The payment should be tied to an invoice or a pledge or something like that that's outstanding. The best practice is when this is received, you're putting it into the undeposited funds account. This is an area that I think, and Courtney, if you see anything different, let me know, but I see a lot of organizations just deposit it right to cash, and it makes the bank reconciliation process a bit more difficult. It's just more cumbersome because you usually will have some side schedule that you're trying to highlight your bank statement and figure out which checks or which deposits all go to one deposit on the bank statement, looking at QuickBooks, and it really becomes very, very funky and a bit messy. So this allows you to lump together the deposits, like all of the checks, all of the cash, all of the donations or member payments into one, so that your cash account and what your bank reconciliation says is exactly what the bank statement says. It really just cleans it up. If you've got some board members, a treasurer perhaps, or leadership that's reviewing your bank reconciliation, which frequently is an audit recommendation, it really helps them as well in that review process. There's less questions. Again, it's just making sure that we're maintaining a clean accounting system. The next thing on the disbursement side that we wanted to look at is paying bills. So there's two different ways, and I think we see often that people get confused on what is a bill, what is a check. I'm writing a check, but do I have to have a bill? All of those things. So a bill is what you enter when you get an invoice from one of your vendors. So they're giving you an invoice. They have an invoice date on it. It allows you to keep track of what you owe. Oftentimes we see people have a file folder with all of their bills in it, and they don't actually enter it until they're writing that check. That really, really causes a lot of extra work, because I've seen clients and they literally will go through their file folder on a weekly or biweekly basis to see, okay, what's due, instead of just put them in the system and it spits out a report for you that says this is what's due this week. It really streamlines that process. It allows you to report to leadership, report to your board. This is what we owe, everything that we owe, and it's not a separate schedule. Once you have it in as a bill, then you're making a bill payment instead of just issuing a check. It allows you to have better accrual accounting, so things are recorded in the appropriate period. You've got things, if you have an expense that's attributable to an event that you held last month, it's going to the expense, because the bill date will be last month. The expense is going to be last month. So it all aligns a bit better. It really helps for more accurate financial reporting. A check, on the other hand, if you are a completely cash basis, you don't have a ton of activity, you can use checks for sure. Or if it's just something that you have to pay the caterer a check today and you're just writing it, they didn't even give you an invoice, which is not best practice and we wouldn't recommend. But if that happens, then you just write the check, you pay it now. There's less entry because it's one time that you're touching that transaction. Again, best practices, we would absolutely recommend that you stick with bill payments so that you can have that accurate financial reporting, accrual accounting, and it really helps reflect the financial activities a bit better. The next thing that we see oftentimes people not take advantage of is the bank feeds. QuickBooks Online, it connects to the bank's website. So you don't have all of the extra data entry for deposits or for checks written or for transfers made, or if you're getting in a bunch of credit card payments from a merchant service for dues, transactions, whatever that might be. What it does is it automatically presents you with these transactions to be coded. Part of the automation process within QuickBooks is it guesses, because you train it over time to guess appropriately and correctly, but it guesses how to code those transactions as well. And then the reconciliation process is more matching than doing data entry throughout the month or at month end. It really, really saves a lot of time, and it allows for more accurate reconciliation as well. Within the bank feed, another question we often get is, can I only attach one bank account or can I do multiple? You can have multiple different accounts. You can see up here on the screen, there's a checking, a savings, and then it also even has a MasterCard. You can connect the bank feeds to your credit card system. So you're also not manually entering in all of the credit card transactions, which is definitely a headache for many people. So these are 3 things, best practices, absolutely, we would say you should look into, take advantage of if possible. And as it shows on the screen, there's always for review, categorized and excluded. So every time you're presented with these transactions, occasionally you will have already entered the transaction, so you don't want it duplicated. You can exclude the bank feed one, and it shows you what you've already categorized, what you've already reviewed. And again, it really, I'm going to call it a robot, but it's really that automation that's presenting you with transactions to review, as opposed to your team having to do any data entry in that. It really saves a lot of time. When you're looking at the transactions for review, you're confirming them. So QuickBooks tries to match it up for you. And it isn't always right, but you train it just like any robot, any pet, anything. It learns over time what is supposed to be matched together. So it's really, really helpful to look for the match. You have these options that you can confirm if it's the right, or you can look for other matches. Again, it's more and more streamlined the more you use it. So please just don't get frustrated after the first month. We've certainly seen people, because it's just a different process. Make sure that you give it a couple months to get used to. When you're looking at it, you have the option, if it doesn't come over in the bank feed with the vendor, you can fill all of this information in right there and then match it up. You can see down here, you can create the rules so that you can make sure that it isn't a one and done sort of a thing. You can say every single time we get something from in this transaction as Hicks Hardware, we're always going to categorize it here. It's always going to go to this class. This is how we want to do it. And it'll do it that way forevermore. Very, very helpful to streamline things and save some time in the accounting team. When you're looking at the transactions as well, you can always undo anything that you've done. You can exclude or put things here. You can always move back again, as we said, but this is where if it's something that was already recorded, you just exclude it, and then it's not included on your bank reconciliation process. The bank rules we talked about a little bit already. You can get to the screen from the that screen I just showed a little bit ago that had the matching options. So when you go in here, you can say every single time money comes into this bank account, it does X, if it's a transfer or whatever it might be. This is something, again, it takes a little bit of time to do the setup early on. And we see a lot of people not take time because we're all trying to get through the day. We're all trying to get all of our tasks done for the day. It's really going to save you time in the long run if you look at this functionality. The receipts is another thing that I personally actually haven't used much of, but I know Courtney has, and it's really, really helpful for those who are getting receipts from employees. A great example is credit card receipts. So you have a credit card that you're trying to, I'm sure this doesn't happen in any of your organizations, but you're trying to herd cats, get receipts for all of the credit card transactions so the auditor doesn't have any questions. Everything's aligned. Oftentimes I see it in a separate file. There's a file folder with a bunch of crinkled up receipts in there. This allows you to upload it from a computer, the scanned images. It allows you to upload it from Google Drive, or you can email it directly to the account. It's very, very easy. It's very user friendly. I'm not sure how old this is. I think it's one of the newer features to QuickBooks Online, but it really, really saves a lot of time when you're trying to match up those expenditures. Is there anything else, Courtney, that you had on that one, since I haven't used it too much? No. Good. All right. Bank reconciliations, one thing that we see frequently is people do them outside of the system. We talked a lot early on about why it's important or how we can streamline things. Once you get to this step, always do it in the system. It reduces the external reconciliation, and you can also view your history as well. Goes through a little bit on how to do it. QuickBooks tries to be as user-friendly as possible and tells you, hey, you're not really reconciled. We're not going to let you hit that button. So make sure that you're paying attention to the system. The other thing we want to make sure nonprofits utilize is budgets within QuickBooks. So oftentimes there's a budget spreadsheet put it right into QuickBooks. QuickBooks Online, as well as desktop, has the functionality. You can put it into the system by program, by department, by whatever you might have. You can put in the fiscal year, or you can have different budgeted. We really, really recommend that you use this. It allows you to have streamlined reporting at the end of the month or the end of the grant period, whatever you might have. You can go in, we just have a little bit of information, and all of these slides will be available to you about how to edit your budget once you get it in there. Sometimes instead of editing, we would recommend, if it's a formal amendment to the budget, you can just create a new budget to put in there so you have that historical record. But if there's just some tweaks to the budget as you're going through the initial process, you certainly can come in here and do it within the system. So the reporting that you have after that, we'll talk about a little bit in the financial report, but budget overview report and budget to actual report. These are canned reports directly out of QuickBooks Online. Desktop has the same thing. The other thing that we recommend, I have said a couple of times, is classes in order to organize, process, and report things. We want to make sure that if there is anything that you want to look at a statement of activities for, whether it's a grant or a program or an event that you might host, you're utilizing the classes, not just expanding your chart of accounts. Happy to answer questions. That honestly could be a whole hour conversation with any client, because there's just a lot of options that you've got there. Reporting best practices, and we're getting towards the end. Reporting best practices, we want to make sure that you're looking at the standard reports. There's standard, custom, and management reports. So you can always put a little star on things. It brings it up to your favorites. It just saves some time so that you don't have to go looking for it all the time. When you look at the custom reports, you can go to the customize button within each of the standard reports, and you can tell it you always want it to be month to date, or you always want it to be this transaction. You always want it to include certain columns, if you will. All of those things will save once you customize, or it gives you the option rather to save that once you customize those reports. That'll be under this tab. Management reports are packages, so that at the end of every month, if you have the same exact reports that you are giving to your leadership team or your board, which you should have the same exact reports every single month or quarter, you can have that package already set in there. So when you tell it to run, it'll run and pull those exact reports that you've customized. Again, part of this is just best practices. How do we streamline things to make sure that you're saving time, your team's saving time, and your leadership and board gets consistent reporting? The last thing that we've got here is third-party applications. And this, I think people really are starting to gain some traction. So if you go on the left-hand side within QuickBooks Online, and again, this is one of the differences between online and desktop. There's more functionality, I think, with these applications in online than there is in desktop. That doesn't mean that it doesn't exist in desktop. There sometimes is just a couple more steps, because it's not automatically connected to the internet necessarily. So on online, you just go to this apps, and I don't have a screen of all of the different apps that are there, but they are abundant. I would recommend, if there's anything that you are looking at that you are doing data entry, or you're looking for a workflow, a good one is the accounts payable process. If you have invoices that you're routing through your office, or you're scanning in over here and you're sending emails for approvals, there's an app for that, right? I mean, there are things that connect directly to your current QuickBooks account, so they talk to each other. You're not duplicating your data entry. Another thing to think about when you're looking at these third-party applications is membership databases and CRMs. If you've got AMS systems and things like that that are recording all of your revenue or your receipts when your members pay, or your credit card transactions, make them talk to each other. It's incredibly important, because nobody has time this day and age, any day and age, to enter a transaction twice. We want to make sure that we're minimizing how many touches they have. If you don't find what you need within that system, within the apps that are already there, and I know we just have a couple minutes left, I see Brandy popped on, but if there is that, then there is another application that you can utilize. It's called Transaction Pro. We've started using this more in the last couple of years, just because, again, QuickBooks, all the apps that they have built out, they have an abundance. So they do have quite the variety, but it's not everything. So there are some times that we have to import something for payroll, for example, if we've got extensive payroll allocations. Transaction Pro allows us some additional import capability that QuickBooks Online just doesn't have. So if there's anything that your team or your accounting team looks at and they feel like they're doing multiple or duplicate data entry, please let us know. We'd love to have a conversation and see if there's either an application or potentially this transaction pro can help. All right. Are there any questions? It looks like I think I'll stop screen share so that you can see us all and we can take some questions here.
Actually, yeah, Courtney did a great job of answering most of the questions right through the chat today. So thank you, Courtney, for doing that live throughout the webinar. So for the sake of time, I want to thank Sarah and Courtney for presenting today. And thank everybody for joining us. Tomorrow we will email out a recording of this presentation, and contact information will also be in that email. If you have any additional questions, you can feel free to reach out. Next month, pretty excited. We have a guest speaker helping us navigate the rules of charitable gaming and raffles and all the rules that revolve around holding these types of activities and events. So we're hoping that you will register for that event next month in May. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.